Assistant Vice President for Enrollment here at Dickinson College. We're actually in my office, the Wadner Admissions Building right now, so some of you might be familiar with it. I am also a Dickinson grad. I graduated from Dickinson and met my wife here as well, and have been at Dickinson ever since. This is actually my 14th recruitment cycle on behalf of the college too. I'm really delighted that you all would take some time out of your day. We're going to talk about jumpstarting the admissions process, which I spent a lot of time talking about this time of the year actually. Juniors and sometimes sophomores are just kind of digging into their processes, and high schools around the country are eager to have us and often Dickinson come and speak to them about just this topic. Where am I? What should I be thinking about? What should I start doing, or am I behind at all? And the answer often is you're not behind yet, which is often really reassuring. So my job today is hopefully to cover a little bit about the admissions landscape. I want to talk briefly about the timeline, kind of where people might be, and acknowledging that everyone in this webinar joining us here today might be at different parts of the process, and that's okay. So I'm going to try to hit on a couple different parts as we talk throughout the next half hour or so. I'm going to hit on academics, I'm going to hit a little bit on extracurriculars, and then I'll talk a little bit about actually applying, but just briefly. We only have about a half an hour together. And if you've ever sat on one of my information sessions, I'm trained to speak in 45-minute chunks. So this half an hour will be a test for me as well. We'll save some time at the end for questions too, but if you have them, you're welcome to type them in and I can see them up here on the screen. So if you see me looking intently at the screen, that's because I'm reading your questions. I think it's probably worth starting with the broader landscape first. It's pretty complicated out there. There's a lot of noise. If you're entering this process as a parent for the first time and haven't done it in a little while, I recognize that it's going to look different for you than it did perhaps when you were applying to college or to Dickinson even. You're going to hear from a lot of people, everybody. I'm thinking about Thanksgiving in a few days, and that seems to be the time of the year that everybody claims some type of expertise over the admissions process. So it's an aunt or an uncle, like everybody seems to know about admissions. And so, you know, beyond the guidebooks and the rankings and everything like that, you're going to have a lot of opinions about the admissions process. Everybody seems to be very eager to talk about it. You hear it's easy to pick up the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and read an article about the college admissions process. And people's anxiety about it. I think they write about it because there's a lot of unknowns and because they're really anxious about it. And both of those things are true. We only hear about Stanford's acceptance rate or Harvard's acceptance rate, and that makes people really, really nervous. Not acknowledging often that I think the national acceptance rate lives in the mid 70s to the high 70s. And so those are two really different places for people to spend their time and to think about a lot. But we acknowledge that there are more applications than ever before. There are about the same number of students applying to college, but there are more applications being sent. I know when I applied to college, the average was around 4 or 5 applications per student. For all colleges and universities nationally, there's about 4,200 of us. But for all of us, the average is about 8 to 9 applications per student. At just private colleges, it's almost 12 applications per student. So it has absolutely reshaped the landscape, right? It really isn't about more students applying, it's about more applications than ever before. The highest I ever heard of at Dickinson, there was a student that shared this with us a few years ago that he had applied to Dickinson and 132 other colleges. So today, I'm not going to talk a lot about the right way and the wrong way to do this process. That is definitely the wrong way to do it, right? You should not be applying to 133 colleges. No one should tell you to do that. You should never even get close. So as you're thinking about the timeline, and maybe some things to think about in terms of, you know, where do I start and when do I start? If you're a first-year student in high school or you're a first-year parent in high school, take a breath, right? You've got lots of time. The best way to do this process well is by doing high school well. The best thing you can do for yourself in preparing for the admissions process over all 4 years is to really lean into high school. Enjoy it, explore it, attempt classes that are maybe outside of your comfort zone, but do high school well. If you're a first-year student or a parent of a first-year student, just take a breath. You've got some time, and there are plenty of opportunities to dig into this. As a sophomore, I think there are some tangible pieces that you can really start to consider. You should continue to do high school well, but as a sophomore, you've kind of overcome the hump of ninth grade, or your student has, and they should really be thinking about their classes for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade year. What are their goals by the time they're a junior and a senior? What types of classes might they want to be taking? What type of rigor do they want to consider? You'll hear that word a lot in the college admissions process. We talk a lot about rigor. It's important for us. We try to understand students within their contexts, acknowledging that every single high school in the country is different. And those contexts are important to us, as is the rigor within those contexts. We're not asking students to accomplish 12, 13, 25 AP credits or the full IB diploma by the time they're a senior, but we're asking them to appropriately challenge themselves year after year. That's going to mean something different for every single student, but we're looking for that on the transcript. I know that I was just joined by a group of colleagues from Columbia and Vanderbilt, other highly selective colleges across the country. And we all really settled on the fact that by far the most important thing to us in the admissions process is the student's academic record, their body of work over the last 4 years. What have they done? What have they been able to accomplish? And beyond that, I think we also acknowledged that about 80, maybe 70 to 80% of the students in the applicant pool can do the work. So students are answering that question for us, right? Because they've been thoughtful as sophomores, been thoughtful as juniors, been thoughtful as seniors about what's appropriate for me. How am I challenging myself? How am I successful in the classroom? So you can start as a sophomore. For those of you that know me well, you know that my wife is an AP English teacher for juniors in high school. So we think about this a lot, both here at work and at home. I think as a sophomore, you can really start thinking about what classes do I enjoy? You should start encouraging your student to start thinking about, why do I love this teacher? Why do I love this subject? Do I want to explore it more, right? High school for sure is still, you have plenty of time to explore and ask yourself those questions. I suspect that your students are not journalers, right? They're not in the habit of writing things down, but at some point in the college admissions process, we're going to ask them to write these things down. We're going to ask them to write a college admissions essay. We're going to ask them to write a supplement. The University of Chicago is going to ask them, where's Waldo really, or to solve for X, right? We're going to ask you all these different things, and ultimately we're going to ask you to be reflective on who you are, what do you value, what do you hope for in the college that you might ultimately join. And so if your student isn't in the process of writing things down, and they don't have to be ultimately, but it might be a place where you can encourage them to do that, right? Think about, what do you enjoy? Why do you enjoy it? And start writing some of those thoughts down through their sophomore, junior, and senior year. It's also a time as a sophomore to start exploring some colleges, right? Just dipping your toes in the water. If they're not familiar with the difference between a liberal arts college, a university, a private school, and a public school, a rural and suburban school. And the fact is that they probably have a sense for 25, 30, 40 colleges in the nation, but not much beyond that. The best thing that you can do for your student is encourage them to come to this process with an open mind. It will probably challenge you and your student to do the same. I was at a program a few weeks ago with 1,200 students in the audience and their families, and we asked them to write down 3 colleges that they knew or that they might be considering in their process. And then we gave them a couple minutes, and we listed about 25 colleges. And we asked them to raise their hand if they still had colleges on their list. If they still had 3 colleges, not a single hand went up out of 1,200 people. We asked them to raise their hand if they had 2 colleges left on their list. 3 hands went up. We asked them to raise their hand if they had all 3, if they had any on their list, right? And only 10 hands went up. Getting the sense for why college is so competitive at Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. It's because everybody applies to those exact same colleges. Out of 1,200 people, only 10 people came up with schools that were not on those 25, were not on the list of 25. So as a sophomore, you can really encourage your student to think broadly about their list and start dipping their toes in the water. If you live close to a city, go to a city, explore it a little bit, right? As a junior, I think it's really time to start building that list, right? Start thinking critically about what's jumped off the page at you, what's gotten you excited. you'll have time to narrow it down probably the spring of your junior year. It's when you really want to start doing your official visits, going to college campuses, actually signing up for a tour, an information session, considering what colleges have to offer. We'll mention in a second, but it makes sense, right? If you can work it like a funnel, if you have the chance to visit more than once, right? Your first visit should be an introductory visit. Go to an open house, just do the tour, even if you're driving by, right? Explore kind of at your own pace. If you have the chance to do a second visit, maybe that's the opportunity to do an interview, to go back and sit in on the class, to meet with faculty, right? So if you have the chance to visit more than once, you'll have the opportunity to kind of do a more in-depth search. You eat in the cafeteria, you spend time chatting with students if you have the chance. I think to the best of your ability, especially during your junior year, to be thoughtful about those visits. At some point, you're going to get in the car, you're going to drive to Boston, you're going to look to your student to the right of you, and they're going to tell you that they're not getting out of the car, right? You've just driven to a college of their dreams. They look around. You look at them. They say, I'm not getting out of the car. You say, yes, you are. They say, no, I'm not. Everybody bursts into tears. That's probably likely to happen, right? But you can avoid some of that by trying to dip your toes in the water a little early, starting to narrow that list, and doing kind of a funneled search. And a lot of that can happen during that sophomore year as well, too. You're going to hear colleges talk a lot about demonstrated interest, and it's probably worth spending a second on. Not every single college in the country cares about it. There's certainly a really broad spectrum of colleges in the middle that do. Dickinson is one of them. Colleges are really highly protective of their yield rate, so the number of offers, acceptances that we ultimately put out there. We're really protective of them, and one of the ways that we can get a sense for who's actually going to show up in August of that following year is by tracking students' demonstrated interest. Some of you, depending on where you are in the process, are going to be really familiar with this term. For us, it doesn't add up to anything, right? It's not about, you know, sending 100 emails or going on 15 tours of our college, or you know, you should do it all within moderation. You should be your most professional, most mature selves for students in this process. But it is about finding colleges maybe that you really like. If you have the chance to visit them, to reach out to a regional counselor. I work with students just in Mercer, Monmouth, and Middlesex counties in New Jersey. Those 3 counties, I am their regional counselor. So I'm the person they can write to, they can call. If they come to visit, they can ask for me. And it's a chance to build a relationship with a student. Last year, Dickinson received almost 6,400 applications for admission. Our job is to attempt to enroll a class of about 600 students every single year. My job is not to admit a class. My job is not to admit a class. My job instead is to craft a community. And one of the ways that we get there is by really listening to students, trying to understand, have they done their research? Do they really connect with this place? And demonstrated interest for Dickinson and lots of schools like us, not just small schools, but lots of schools that employ a holistic review process, pay close attention to this idea of demonstrated interest. We come to see you at students' high schools, right? So we're in students' high schools. We host receptions often in students' backyards, and Dickinson is not alone in this. We make an effort, right, to be in your spaces so that you can show us that you do have an interest in our school as well, too. And junior year is a great time to do that. As you're narrowing that list, I suspect that, you know, if you've got a great college counselor at your high school that you're using, they will encourage you to build a list that is tiered, right? That has maybe a few super reaches, schools that are just highly competitive, that are challenging for everyone to be admitted to. They're going to maybe encourage you to have a few reaches, schools that are still going to be challenging and difficult and highly selective, but maybe more attainable for kind of everyone in the nation. They're going to have you build a list with some targets, right? Schools that are probably right in your wheelhouse, but still are unknowns, right? And some schools that feel like likely schools for you, schools where your student may have a really good chance. And so as you think about that list, as you think about that junior year, that's where we want you to head. We want you to head in the direction of building a tiered list where you're giving, you know, thoughtful attention to all of those different institutions, that you're building a list that is representative of the students' interests, but also realistic, right? And allows them to have some really good choices at the end of this process. As they lean into the kind of the summer of their junior year, they'll be writing their essays. I would really encourage your student to write their essay or begin their essay writing, not too early, right? Because they have to think about themselves. They got to think about the things that they love, that they're really interested in. But the spring of their junior year into the summer of their junior year. Wake Forest last year asked students to write 7 additional essays. So you had to write 1 for the Common Application, and then you had to write 7 additional essays just for Wake Forest. Now, Wake Forest is a bit anomalous in how many essays they ask you to write, but you can imagine, right, if you added a couple Wakes to your list, you would have a lot of essays to write your senior year. For anybody that's done this process already, you know that senior year is really busy. There's a lot to do. AP courses, advanced courses are challenging for students. Don't wait. The best thing that you can do for yourself is thoughtfully pace out this process. And as a parent, if you are a parent in this process, as a parent, I think one of the things that you can do is help your student employ a system to organize this process for themselves. And there are any number of ways that you can help them with this, right? I mentioned journaling, right? Just writing thoughts down. I liked this school. I didn't like this school. I liked this teacher. I liked this subject. Just gathering some initial thoughts that they can go back to. I like spreadsheets a lot. That's how I organize my life. And that might really work for you and it might work for your student. But we're going to throw a ton of deadlines and requirements and requests. You're going to want average SATs or ACTs or GPAs, and it's going to be really quickly very difficult to manage. A spreadsheet could be a really easy way to do that. I encountered a young lady and her father about a year ago leaving the admissions office here at Dickinson, and they were in the parking lot, and we were kind of both leaving at the same time, and I saw him pull out his phone, and he took a 30-second vignette of his daughter, a little video of his daughter after their visit to Dickinson, maybe no more than 30 seconds. And we chatted for a minute and they left. Ultimately, she was admitted to Dickinson, and I met them again in the spring of her senior year as an admitted student at Dickinson. And we recalled that conversation. And he said they visited 25 colleges. And after they visited every single one of those colleges, they took a short video, no more than 30 seconds. Before they narrowed their list and before they chose which colleges to apply, they went through all the spreadsheets, they looked at all the middle 50%, all the SAT, ACT ranges, they did all of their due diligence and all of their good research, but before they made their final decision, they watched every single one of those videos. For them, the admissions process, it's different for everyone, but it is often about both the head and the heart, right? And for them, it was capturing those intangibles. So as a parent in this process, you know, a word of advice perhaps is to think about a system that works for your family and consistently employ it throughout the process, a way to organize it as well too. I think if your student is really struggling with writing this college admissions essay because it can feel super daunting and if they don't know where to go, a piece of advice I tell students all the time is to read a memoir, right? If they're really struggling and they don't know how to write about themselves, read about someone else who wrote about themselves and get a sense for what it looked like for them. A college admissions essay is not an autobiography. We don't want to hear everything that you've done for your entire life, right? We don't even want to hear everything about this particular activity. We want a snapshot, a moment in time that advances the ball down the field, right? We want to know who you are, what you value, how you've stumbled, how you've picked yourself back up, something that you've done well, something you've struggled with, somebody that you look up to. We don't want to know all those things. I told you that my wife is an AP English teacher. She tells students all the time when starting this college admissions essay to focus on a blade of grass, not a field of grass, right? It's really tempting in this process to want to tell us everything. The college admissions process is the decision-making process. We ask you to make choices about what you want us to know and how to convey that to us. The admissions essay is really the chance for students to take all of this together and deliver their voice to the admissions committee. And to do it thoughtfully. So give yourself plenty of time to do it, right? Junior year, you're building this thoughtful list, you're visiting again. Senior year, you're continuing to do high school well, you're applying. You're really considering too your strategy, and I hesitate to even use the word strategy, but it's kind of what it is. You're considering your application strategy. You're thinking about early decision 2. You're thinking about early action, non-binding early ways to apply to college. You're thinking about priority early action or single choice early action, like Princeton has. You're thinking about a regular decision or rolling admission. But the thing that you don't want to do is let any of these deadlines sneak up on you, right? You want to have a plan, and you probably want to think about that the summer before your senior year as you're beginning to really narrow that list. Who has what deadlines? Where am I most interested in? Often, not always, but often those early decision deadlines have higher acceptance rates, right? There are smaller pools. Students are looked at as individuals in those pools as opposed to being compared to every other student in the applicant pool. The most famous answer in the college admissions process for any admissions officer when asked about deadlines or selectivity or anything like that is, it depends. And that's a really frustrating answer for families, but it really should encourage you to ask every single college that's on your list these thoughtful questions. What does it mean to go early decision? What does it mean to be in this applicant pool? Or what does it mean when you say you're interested in demonstrated interest? What do I have to do to demonstrate to you that I am genuinely interested in this place? It's going to depend for every single school. And fortunately or unfortunately for you, you're going to have to ask. And then you're going to have a system that organizes all that information really well. Keeping an eye on my time, we've got a couple minutes left, but I promised you that I would touch briefly on activities. We talk a little bit about academics. So let me talk about if you are a parent of a sophomore or junior in this process, and you're thinking about, I had a student last year apply to Dickinson and send me a 25-page resume. There's no student in the world that should have done 25 pages worth of things, right? You just shouldn't. You should be doing things that you love, that you're really interested in, but in no way should it add up to 25 pages. Not when you're a 17 or 18-year-old, right? You just haven't done that many things yet, and that's okay, right? Students, I think, really feel this pressure, this arms race to accomplish everything as a high school student. That's what college is for. We're here to open doors for students and put them on volcanoes and send them around the world and put them in a class with an amazing professor that's going to really challenge them. And that's in part why we exist, to do those things for them. But as students, especially as sophomores and juniors, to begin exploring, to find activities that they really like, we're often asked, is it better to be a well-rounded student or is it better to be what we call a well-angled student, right? A well-rounded student is that student who writes a poem in Spanish about how chess club made him a better quarterback. That's the well-rounded student, right? We love that student. That's a really interesting student. We also really like the well-angled student, right? So this is me, as students are thinking about their activities, giving families permission that if you see your student becoming a thespian or that they're in love with writing, or they're really interested in science, that they're starting to head in that direction, and you're worried that they're not playing soccer at the same time that they're playing the harp, right? We're here to tell you that it's okay to become a bit well-angled, right? Colleges are interested in students with some depth so that they can add some depth to the well-rounded students, and we like the well-rounded students so they can add breadth to the well-angled students. We need both, right? And so this is us telling you, as you're thinking about those activities, to do them genuinely, to begin to follow passions, but still leave plenty of time for exploration, and to be a high school student as well, too. To not overplan your summers, right? To not spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because you think a college wants you to do it. If you want to do it and you love to do it and you're really interested in doing it, by all means, go after it. But if you're doing it because you think a college is going to want to see it on your resume, it's probably not how it's going to shine through on your application ultimately. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm keeping an eye on questions. I wanted to mention too that there's no right way or wrong way to do this process. If you're an alum or parent of a past Dickinson student or even a future Dickinson student, we stand really ready here in admissions to help you, to answer questions. They don't have to be about Dickinson. They can be about the admissions process in general. We can't certainly speak to other colleges and exactly what they're doing, but we will try our very best to give you really current and thoughtful information that if you're a part of this Dickinson community, we really stand ready to help you. This process is complicated and often really daunting. I think to parents that are on this webinar, one of the things certainly that you can do as well is to be thoughtful about parameters. It's tempting to talk about, especially when you're in the throes of it, especially when your student doesn't seem interested at all. It's tempting to want to talk about the college admissions process every night at dinner or every moment of the day, right? And so I'm not a parent in the admissions process yet. I have 3 children, and they're almost all under the age of 3, so I suspect you are now questioning my ability to make thoughtful decisions. But professionally, I'm very good at it. I would just say that you can do your best to set parameters, right? That if you're tempted to talk about college admissions every night, maybe just talk about it on a Thursday night and a Sunday night, right? Limit your amount of time that you spend on this topic. While it can feel like the end all be all when you're in it, it isn't. I think as much as you can remind your student that the college admissions process is not an evaluation of their self-worth, right? At the end of the day, institutional priorities, outside processes and expectations and demands play outsized roles in this process. And so while a student can look and feel exactly right for one particular school, the fact that they may or may not be admitted is not ultimately an evaluation of their self-worth. I think as a parent in this process, or even as a community member, because again, everyone seems to get involved really quickly, we can remind ourselves of that, I think, important fact often. I don't see questions coming in. I suspect that I was extremely thorough in my 27 minutes of nonstop talking, which again, for those of you that know me, would appreciate that. But I would just put out the offer that I know that me and my colleagues genuinely really mean, which is that we are here to help you. I know that my colleague Liz Toth over in Alumni Relations can certainly get a hold of me, but you can find all of my contact information on our admissions website. I know that my colleague Kathy Davenport, our Vice President for Enrollment and also a Dickinson grad, has been out on the road, has been with many of you, spending time in your communities chatting about this process as well. I know this was a lot, but it was just the tip of the iceberg as well too. So there is much, much more to know about this process. So if we can be helpful, please let us know. Good luck.